course, we're listening to Beethoven, as has been the last 30 programs, and we're up to the 16th piano sonata. Rather reactionary sonata for how Beethoven has been developing. It's not played much. It's also very beautiful. And we have the first movement in a performance by Arthur Schnabel. Schnabel in the first movement of Opus 31, number 3. Eric Blum writes that Beethoven seems to be interested in technical and keyboard devices in this sonata. And one is conscious of a momentary setback in purely musical inventiveness on Beethoven's part. Of all the 32 sonatas, this is undoubtedly the least favored by musicians and by the public at large. There is no harm in saying that, since in every race one horse must necessarily be the last, though it is true that this comparison is not altogether a happy one, the loss of a race being an indisputable fact, whereas the designation of one work of art in a whole group as the weakest remains to a large extent dependent upon personal taste. Here, however, the question of taste enters into the argument less than in most similar cases. Perhaps, at any rate, there is a pretty general critical agreement that the G major sonata of Opus 31 is the least representative of Beethoven's genius in the whole of that class, while nobody could for a moment dispute the assertion that it is decidedly not on a level with its two companion works in D minor and E flat major. And indeed it is not on the level of the Tempest Sonata or the Opus 31 number 3 in E flat. However, it's a charming work, and the slow movement doesn't aim for profundity, which is usually Beethoven's aim in his slow movements, but at a certain graciousness, and we'll hear that soon. Let's get another performance going. Who do you have up?
I have Daniel Barenboim.
Of this delightful first movement of Opus 31 number 3.
Giddy up.
31 number 1. Daniel Barenboim in the first movement of the Sonata, Opus 31, number 1, G
Riding
major.
to a victory. Yeah.
Oh, I think that this is such a wonderful movement. I just don't understand why it's not played.
Well, it's sort of interesting. I mean, he made it sound quite a bit more interesting than Schnabel, and I wouldn't have thought that. You know, Schnabel has such an approach to the music that actually I liked Barenboim's better, but it was show-off, and it sounded very much, like, as you pointed out, like Gottschalk in the middle.
Well, yeah, just one little phrase.
Well, no, several times.
Right, when it came back, yes, it's a fun movement, and these works were relief for Beethoven as he straddled symphony to symphony and more profound piano sonatas and the string quartets. He couldn't always be profound, of course. That would have been terrible.
You say it's a fun movement.
I think so.
I wonder what Gould would do with it. I didn't know he had recorded this, David. Your music department just came up with this record, and I thought, we've got to hear this.
We sure do. Glenn Gould in a riotous performance of the Opus 31 number 3. Opus 31 number 1.
Why do you keep saying number 3?
Because it's my favorite of the series.
But this is not it. This was the last horse in the race.
I wonder now, you see, we read this statement of Eric Blum talking about something that had nothing to do with the music. He was just saying that every horse race has to have a loser, and ever since, the certain kinds of humor in this music has given vent to your imagination, and you haven't gotten horses out of your system. Now, I am again saying that this is such a dangerous thing. You see, now forever after you'll be hearing Tournament Gallop of Gottschalk in it, so to speak.
Well, that's what I'm hearing in that. I mean, even more so in the Gould than in the Barenboim.
What I'm trying to say is, how much do these programmatic and literary little things happening in our brain influence and distort our listening powers? I think very much.
Well, I have a...
That's why words set to music, that's absolute music, can just drive me out of my mind.
No, that I can understand. But Eric Blum must have had some sort of thought of that. Maybe he didn't want to say it directly, that it sounded like... it sounded to me in portions like music for a silent movie, Max Sennett comedy or whatever. I'm sorry. Yes, it has musical.
No, it's just interesting because put something in one's mind.
Just the
forever after, I'll be hearing a horse race, perhaps. Or anyway, Gould played it exactly, full of the spirit of. This is one of the best Beethoven performances by Gould that I've heard so far, because the music absolutely demands that. On the title page of this work, the fashion of publishers still in 1802 to say a sonata for pianoforte or harpsichord. I guess because I couldn't, of course, imagine this performance played on the harpsichord.
No, I imagine not.
But and certainly not Opus 31 number 2. But we'll be back after this message for the slow movement.
You said Opus 31 number 2 this time.
Yes, G major, Opus 31 number 1. After this work will be the D minor and then the E flat. Let me read what Beethoven says on art and artists. He wrote to the Peters, who was music publisher in Leipzig, "I love straightforwardness and uprightness, and believe that the artist ought not to be belittled, for, alas, brilliant as fame is externally, it is not always the privilege of the artist to be Jupiter's guest on Olympus all the time. Unfortunately, vulgar humanity drags him down only too often and too rudely from the pure upper berth." Beethoven loves to talk about Olympus and Jupiter and other of the Greek gods, and although we might think of this as naive, the more we read Beethoven's letters, we realize that this was a living mythology for him. They had symbolic things behind it for Beethoven's mind. Now we have the slow movement, absolutely one of the most gracious slow movements in the sonatas, not aiming at anything but grace. Let's have performance by Maria Grinberg? Yes. The Adagio Grazioso movement from Opus 31, number 1 in G major, and that was Maria Grinberg. Well, Beethoven wrote, "There ought to be only one large art warehouse in the world, to which the artist could carry his artworks, and from which he could carry away whatever he needed. As it is, one must be half a tradesman." A letter to the publisher Hofmeister. He was always writing letters to publishers, and many little gems included. Now, Beethoven is critic from this little Dover publication, Beethoven the Man and the Artist, is recorded by his own words. You know, Handel was his god, especially near the end of his life when a complete edition of Handel was given to him as a gift. And he wrote, "Handel is the unattained master of all masters. Go and learn from him how to achieve vast effects with simple means." And again on Handel, "Handel is the greatest composer that ever lived. I would uncover my head and kneel on his grave." And then to Hofmeister again he writes that "You are going to publish Sebastian Bach's works is something which does good to my heart, which beats in love of the great and lofty art of this ancestral father of harmony. I want to see them soon." And this, I think, is 1801, and this is the first complete publication of The Well-Tempered.
We'll have to pause for a moment, and then we'll be back with another version of the middle movement.
Glenn Gould.
Performance before?
The first movement, I just loved it. All right, now the Adagio Grazioso in the hands of Glenn Gould. the Adagio Grazioso in the hands of Glenn Gould.
Who made it sound very Mozartian, I thought.
Yeah. Yes, this is not one of Beethoven's revolutionary works. And he starts again in a most glorious creation in the next sonata in D minor, which is called The Tempest. But this is a fine piece, and Gould played it as only Gould plays. It's a very disturbing thing for me to hear us playing.
Why is it disturbing? Because it changes your approach to the music? Does he make you hear things you hadn't heard before?
I like that part.
Oh, but why is it disturbing?
I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be disturbed. Anyway, it's a 3-movement work, and we're gabbing here because there's just no time for another performance, nor of the last movement, so we'll have to save it for our next program, where we'll also play a complete performance of the work. Now, in this little book, Beethoven's words, he writes on July 17th, to a 10-year-old admirer, the true artist has no pride. Unhappily, he realizes that art has no limitations. He feels darkly how far he is from the goal, and while perhaps he is admired by others, he grieves that he has not yet reached the point where the better genius shall shine before him like a distant sun. Then in 1816, in his conversation book, he writes, only the artist or the free scholar carries his happiness within him. And then, to the Archduke Rudolph himself, what will be the judgment a century hence concerning the lauded works of our favorite composers today, inasmuch as nearly everything is subject to the changes of time, and, more's the pity, the fashions of time, only that which is good and true will endure like a rock, and no wanton hand will ever venture to defile it. Then let every man do that which is right, strive with all his might toward the goal which can never be attained, develop to the last breath the gifts with which a gracious Creator has endowed him, and never cease to learn, for life is short, art eternal. And that's our program today, and thank you very much for listening.